was
seats.
a
It's pretty nice.
when he was growing up. I could never try to like, make, like any excuse. My dad's like, oh yeah, huh? Like my tire got flat. Oh, yeah, you let the air out. But that's also that my dad, like my.
And then the Connecticut company ordered so many of them, they were delivered here, and then they operated. This car operated until 1947 on this line. Right after the war, they closed down. Most of the trolleys were done away with, and then they switched over to diesel-operated buses. And then it was the end of the trolley car. So that's when our members started buying them, and they would, like I said, $115, $116, they would buy a trolley car. They would bring it here, and eventually they started building the buildings to put the cars in because the track in the street went away and the overhead line was shut off. And so the five guys, they bought a military surplus generator, and they rewired it to be DC, and that's how they got power. So if you wanted to operate a trolley, you brought like a 5-gallon can of diesel fuel with you, put it in the tank of the generator, you start it up, and then you powered the line, and then you went for a ride. That's how it ran. So we kind of backed into being a museum. That wasn't the original thought to be a museum. It was a club, beast. We do not have too many cars across. We did have one car from Sweden. What we gave that, we sent that back to Sweden about maybe 8 years ago.
Why?
They wanted it, and we're hoarders and whores for money. So we'll do anything for money, and because we put the money into the cars, buy a gallon of paint, buy a gallon of varnish, whatever we need, and trolley parts are just very rare. You can't get the parts.
Handmade.
Yeah, right. So that's basically how we operate. That way. Last weekend, most of the museums, there's like 30 of us in the United States, and we get together once a year. It was last weekend. It's called Winterfest, and we get together and you kind of bring a list of the parts that you have that you don't need, and then you wheel and deal with the other museums. They need a truck from here. That one needs this, and so you go to the museum and you come home with. Not physically with the parts, but you know that you're going to be trading the parts with other museums to get. So we're very friendly with the other trolley museums. There's another one in Connecticut, in Warehouse Point, up north of Hartford.
Is that what it's called?
Pardon?
Is that what it's called? Warehouse Point?
It's the Connecticut Trolley Museum. And we work with them. Our mechanic sometimes helps them fix their trolley cars. We have about 9 miles of track. If you add everything up, it's about 9 miles. The line itself is about a mile, just under 2 miles long. It goes out over the marsh. It's really pretty. People come from other museums and say we have the best line in the world. Because a lot of them, they bought last year themselves. Where this is an actual line where the trolleys used to run. If you went that way, you could go to Dover, Delaware. If you went that way, you could go to Sebago Lake, Maine. But it would take you 11 days to make the whole trip. But this was an actual trolley line instead. Yes, it used to go up the street and then connect onto another street. It used to go down Main Street in East Haven, over the bridge into New Haven, and this way it would go to follow the water right along Branford, right along the water edge. Now it's owned by the Branford Electric Railway Association. We're a non-profit organization. We're not owned by anybody, so to speak. We do have an executive director. We have a board of directors that meets monthly. That basically oversees the management. But it's we don't get any government money. Once in a while we'll get we'll get a grant for this or that. Yeah, it's interesting with all the crazy things going on. Some museums that have hired staff off of money, like federal money or whatever, now all of a sudden you're in trouble. So we don't have any staff. We can't fire anybody because we didn't have anybody. So in some ways, it worked out for us.
Sing in disguise.
Yeah.
Right, we're not going any, that's right, we're not going any further.
So the compressor doesn't run.
That
So we're gonna change this.
that noise you're hearing is an air compressor because the brakes on the car
Since we didn't
are air
have to change
brakes.
the ends, we'll change the ends for the next
Metal
pass.
line. Two of them are down the line, and we're using this one. And they're just moving around, taking turns. So I'll give you a quick tour. We have cars from the 1800s that ran in Central Park in New York that was a horse car, and it's called an Omni car. It held about 6 people. The horse would get to, and it was on rail because it was easier for the horses to pull them. Get to the end of the line, the operator pulled a pin, and they got the horse. They actually turned the top of the car around, but the truck stayed on the tracks. And we have, and that's from Central Park. We have one of those here up in one of the new buildings. Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't say it.
Oh, that's good. I figured that.
So when trolleys were running, the way it would work is that if I wanted to start a trolley company, I would go to the city and I would say, I want to put a trolley on Main Street. And the city would say, okay, you pay us X amount of dollars, rent for the street, and then would there be negotiations? So one of the things that the city may say to me, and it was very common in the early 1900s, most towns didn't have snowplows because no one had a car. So it snowed, you know, they got snow on the road, and the horses came with a carriage that opened it up. Well, when trolleys started going on, they said to the trolley companies, you need to do this. So this is a street sweeper, also known as a snow plow. So 6 inches or less, this would go down the street, that would spin, and oh my God, what a racket it makes. So there's a motor up here that drives that. There's another motor up above that runs it, and then there's the 4 motors underneath to make it. It's a horrendous noise, but it spins and it would throw the snow off of the track. If I had 2 tracks in the same street, I would do this. This is a snow blade. I would actually pick it up and swing it out, and I would plow the track next to me. So most trolley companies had that because the city would say to them, hey, you want to put tracks in my street? You have to maintain the street, and when it snows, you have to plow the street. So some of the first snow plows in most cities in the United States were with trolley cars. And then they would plow the street. And then when people got cars, they were going to drive their car, they would drive it where the trolleys would drive because it was the only place that was plowed when it snowed. So kind of interesting history.
Just to have one.
Oh, we have 3 of these. Now this is an example of a horse car. This would have been pulled by 2 horses. I think it holds like 10, maybe 12 people if you really knew each other well. And they would use this to go to work in the morning. So you lived out in an area, this would come into your neighborhood. It would be on a track in the street, and you would hop on. Notice how low the step is. This is what we call a streetcar because you get on and off at a street level. So this would have pulled. The operator would have been up here with maybe 2 horses. Horses would last about an hour to an hour and a half. They were exhausted. So they would have to take the horses, put them away, and bring out another set of horses. But they only ran in the morning and they only ran in the afternoon because that's people were going to work and people were going home from work is pretty much when they really operated. When the cities were, like New York City is a good example, there were so many trolley lines running in the city. They had all these overhead wires. Finally, the city said, No more. So New York City had cable cars. And what they do is, here's the track, it's standard gauge. Right about here, there's a hole in the ground.
Like San Francisco.
Exactly. And they had them all over New York City. We actually, up in the building there, we have car 220, and it was a cable car from New York City, ran on 3rd Avenue. And so they would operate the same way. Inside, there's a big lever you pull back. The lever down below collapses 2 wooden blocks together. It grabs the cable, and away you go. The cable is always moving at 11 miles an hour. It would grab the trolley, and away you would go. So New York City actually said to them, look, we don't want any more wire. If you see pictures of New York from the 1800s, the wires overhead, the telephone wires, electric wires are crazy. So they said, we'll rent you the street, but no more overhead wires. So they did cable cars. So that was a progression from horse car. You could do electric, which was pretty rare, or a cable car. And then along comes this guy, and his name is Frank Sprague. If you notice the building you were standing in front of, the name of the building is Sprague. He invented the motors that allowed trolley cars to go more than one car on the same line. Prior to that, only one car could operate on that line. But he was a mechanical engineer. He grew up in Milford, Connecticut, the Devon section of Milford, and he invented a motor. And that motor changed the industry because now it allowed more than one car to run at the same time. So all of a sudden, you started seeing cars like this. So we go from stuff like this to a cable car, and now we're looking at stuff like this. This car built in early 1900s, 1904, this is called a breezer. And these would be used all along the shoreline in Connecticut, up and down the coast, Virginia, Virginia Beach, everybody had these things. So this would go down the street, it would go by, they wouldn't go that fast. So if the car was coming, you could actually run up and hop on and stand on the car and, go for a while. And then when the conductor got close to you, wanted his nickel, you could hop off and you could get a ride for 3 or 4 streets without paying for it, So this, at the end, they said, that's it, no more free rides. So they eliminated that, and then they only used these cars for Yale Bowl. Yale Bowl, Harvard, Yale football games, that was like a big deal in the 40s. And so they would take these cars, they would bring them down to Union Station in New Haven. They seat 75, they hold right around 200 if they're standing, and they would take all those people up to Yale Bowl. This road that it's on, that's Route 34. Yale Bowl is right about where I'm standing, if you looked at that picture. And the baseball stadium for Yale is right across the street. But this is Route 34 that runs between the two of them. Very common to do that. So they went stuff like this. Then the car that we were riding on, that was built a year after this car. This was 1904. That car was built in 1905. You'll notice it had great heat. Still a streetcar, you get on and off from the street level, and then you would hop on that in Branford or East Haven, small communities, and you would ride into the city with that car. And you'd pay, typically it was a nickel. 1910, 1920, it was about a nickel to ride the trolley car. After, 1930, 35, it started to go up a little bit to a dime. By the time the war came, it was 25 cents. During the war to ride a trolley car. So very common to see a car like this or the car that we're riding in. The first car over here, and I apologize they're out of order, but it's for safety reasons, because that one operates and these don't. So if there's a flood, we have to get that one out first. So this car is very late, from the 1920s. And this car would have operated in the center of Connecticut. There's a town called Middletown. Small city. Today, maybe 45, 50,000. Maybe back in the day, 15,000 people. This would have operated in the streets of Middletown. You notice how small it is compared to the car that we were riding. the ridership was starting to drop off. Mr. Ford was selling his cars, so they started building smaller cars because less people were riding them. So over here, we move to another period. This car is from Canada. It's here because in a couple of weeks we have the Easter Bunny, and that's a big event for us. As I said earlier, we'll do anything for money. So the Easter Bunny will arrive here. The Easter Bunny sits in the car. People arrive. They go visit the Easter Bunny. They get a gift, and away they go. The reason this is here, it's from Canada. It has unbelievable heat. If you think the car we were in was warm, this one is warmer. It actually has like a furnace in the car that runs to keep it warm. Kind of interesting. I know I talk a lot. Questions? I thought the wheel was unlocked.
This is a great car. Can't thank you enough for.
I didn't want to ride the car again. The car that's in there, 357, correct? Yeah. That's actually being serviced and getting ready for, we service them before we let anyone ride them. And so that's where we do all our repair work, is in there. And that holds 2 cars down low, and then it has a pit where we actually put the car up high, and we can work from there. We're going to go around the corner. We're going to go this way. So this is another open car, just like the one I showed you next door. This one runs. So this one will be, if you were here in July or August, you could ride on this car going down the line. This is 356. It's almost done. This car had a lot of damage in it. It's from Johnstown, Pennsylvania. In 1933, it was washed off the track when the second dam broke. So we've gone through it. We've rebuilt the whole end. We had a paint job, and it's got a couple more things to do, and then this car will be running this summer. So we have 356, and then you saw 357 in the other building. And both of these operate. I like using these cars. They're nice and low. When the step opens up, it's nice and low to the ground, easy to get in and out. The car that we were on, 865, the step is very high. These are beautiful. They're nice and low to the ground. This car on the right is from Atlanta, Georgia. It's probably the furthest south that we have. Ironically, this car, when Atlanta, Georgia was done with these cars, this car was built in the 1920s. When they were done with it, they basically sold the whole fleet of cars to Seoul, South Korea. And they operated them in the city there for years. This particular car and another one just like it, a farmer bought for $1. And he put it in his farm field. One was used for hay and the other one was the chicken coop. One of our members was driving down there outside of Atlanta, saw the car and said, "Oh my God, I've never seen that car before. That's a design, a style I've never seen." And he said to the farmer, "Can I buy it?" And the guy said, "Yeah, you can buy it for $1 more than I paid for it." So we bought this car for $2, except nothing was underneath it. Everything was gone. So we contacted Seoul, South Korea. They had all the stuff. Even though the trolleys were out of service, we're all hoarders, they saved everything. So we bought the trucks and everything from Seoul, had them shipped back to America, and put the car in service.
That's extraordinary.
And if you've ever been to Coney Island in New York, this car would take you to Coney Island. This car is from the 1800s. and it ran from Brooklyn down into Coney Island. It's called a convertible. This is the summer mode with the iron bars. In the winter, they would replace all these bars with wood with windows. And so the car would be nice and warm in the winter. This car has heated seats from the 1800s, heated seats. And it's just amazing. And they run on 600 volts DC. So this one would take you to Coney Island. This car runs, and typically we use it in the summer. Even this car, the heat on this car is terrible because it's from Atlanta. They didn't have much heat, so they didn't do that. And then the last car I'll show you, because I'll leave you alone. You're probably sick of cars already. But this car is an actual railroad car, a mail car. It actually ran from Providence to New Bedford. And if you look up there, you see the little boxes. The people from the post office would actually work on this car, and they would sort mail, so when it got to either end, they knew what to do with it. And this goes to what I said from the beginning. If I bought the rights to put the rail in the street, they used it in the morning and they used it in the evening to go to work, come home from work. Well, in between, that rail was sitting there. I would rent the rail to the mail company. In New York City, I rented my rail to the garbage collection. And we actually have here a garbage collection car from New York City. They would go down the street at night, everyone's in bed, they would use the trolley tracks, and they'll have the doors that would lift up, and they would throw the garbage in as it went down the street. And if I owned the track, like if I owned 3rd Avenue Rail, they would pay me to use that rail. And so I was in business to make money, right? It was a private company. It wasn't like it is now, like Metro North or Long Island Railroad. It was totally a private company. So any way I could make money, I would try to. So that's a short story.
That's
It's a pretty cool hobby, right? Yeah, we're looking. I live right here about a mile and a half away. So this is what I do. Yes. I come down, I operate cars. That's cool.